So we're about a year into this whole COVID thing, experiencing lockdowns, and many of us are working from home. And initially, it seemed like it was going to be fun for people to work from home, but as time progressed, of course, many of us started to rethink about the way we were working if we wanted to stay productive. So I wanted to talk about that with you, David Allen, and thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for the invitation, Dave. Always happy to chat with you. So we'll take this wherever we want to go. It is an interesting topic,
Yeah.
and certainly a lot of spin about personal productivity, has shown up. And frankly, a lot of reason GTD has even gained a lot of horsepower, in terms of its popularity or its significance, maybe just because of these kinds of situations, for sure.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that too, because when you originally wrote the book, I mean, so much was different, and not just health and COVID, but I mean, technology was different. And GTD has really evolved and survived.
Well, I don't know that it's even evolved so much other than evolved into the audiences that it's impacted and interested and targeted to. So, the methodology and the basics of the methodology haven't changed since I learned them back in the early 1980s. I knew back then your head was a crappy office. You got it, once you got it out of your head, it releases energy. Once you close the loops in terms of incompletions, it releases energy that you didn't know you had that was invested in those things. So I knew a lot even back then about the power of completion. And then of course, once you have more clear space, what do you do with it? And so the whole idea of what do you do with that space and how do you focus? So completion and creation are the two, essentially the zeros and ones in my experience about actually why we're here on the planet and what we're doing here. And it certainly is the core of what GTD was about. So that hasn't changed. But what's changed, as I have made comment, is the necessity for situational awareness. You know, GTD comes to the fore when you're surprised. Uh, it's what when something happens you don't expect that throws you out of cruise control. How do you get back into cruise control if you were even in it to begin with? So, you're most productive when you have the freedom to make a mess, but if you're in one, you can't make one. And then this kind of change produces those kinds of, oh, geez, what do I got? Now I have to work from home. And yeah, but now the kids are here and I have to deal with them too. And what I have no commute time. And now how do I set up office time and so a
Yeah.
lot of people personally have had to deal with that kind of change. You know, I haven't probably, I don't know if you have either, but I've been working virtually for 30 years. So, that was no big deal in terms of
Well,
work
but there
style
was
for
a time.
me.
There was a time though when you had an office, where you had an
Mhm.
office at the GTD World Headquarters,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that meant that you had still an office at home and still an office at work.
Yeah.
Now you're doing most of your work from what I can see is a very lovely office at I presume that's at your home. As
Correct.
you've evolved over the years, I mean, have you seen any change about your workflow?
No, not really. I did most of my workflow even when I had an office. I had an office mainly for the staff that we had that was doing the work that they were doing. And, I had an office there so I could show up and be available personally for meetings, et cetera. But frankly, it didn't make any difference. It was all transparent to me. It didn't matter whether I worked, out of my little office in Ojai and back behind our house in a little cottage or there I went into the office to do it. It was all laptop driven anyway. So all I
Yeah.
had to do was open. I could open my laptop. I could open my laptop on an American Airlines flight and still be as productive or still be as focused as I needed to be given the work that I was doing.
One of the things that I've noticed personally is there was a time when I had an office in Milwaukee, I had an office in Washington, D.C., and I had an office at home. And I was kind of going back and forth for a period of like 6 or 7 years. Uh, what seems to have changed for me is contexts, because now that I've pretty much retired and I'm doing all of my professional work from this office, uh, everything's here. So I don't my whole system of context greatly changed.
Well, context is king in a way. But for me, reminders about what to do and reminders about what I need to think about and what I actually need to do, that's a virtual world for me and has for been for, since 1982. I don't know, God, how many years is that? Uh, so what changed is, or what changes when you're changing those kind of context is what decision support do you have? In other words, wow, in this context, I can pull up this file, I can pull up that file, I can pull up that, and I can't travel those files with me. So that means when I'm in this context, I have this kind of stuff to do. Now, that said, you're going to think differently given where you're sitting right now versus going into your living room and sitting with your laptop. You're going to think
Mhm.
differently. So context is yeah, it is critical. Most people have totally changed their context if they've had to stop going into a structured thing like an office with a typical office, 9 to 5 or 9 to 8 or whatever, or 8 to 4, whatever those kind of things were. I've been reading a good bit about how much stress there is out there, how many people are burning out simply because they've now moved into a 24/7 world where they were able before to just actually leave their personal life, go into their professional life, have it pretty well structured, and then not have to deal with the dog and the kids and their school and and their homeschooling and whatever. And uh, yeah, so a good bit has changed in that regard. Added to that, the I was just reading an article in the Atlantic about the someone's writing about, I forget, the Falbert was the guy's name. He wrote about the shadow work back in 2015. That there's so much work we're doing now that is not recorded. How much
Mm.
time do you spend upgrading a piece of software? How much time do you now have to spend waiting for customer service because they're expecting you to do that now? How many things are you having to do, Dave, in your own environment that you never really had to do before? And like how much of that takes 2 hours of your time?
Mhm.
As Kevin Kelly said in his book, The Inevitable, his first chapter was on upgrading. You're never going to get good at anything. You're going to have to upgrade your washing machine. You're going to have to upgrade your refrigerator. Everything is just becoming more digital.
No.
You're never going to get really good at anything. So how much of your time is now taken up trying to just stay up with the technology that's moved way ahead of frankly our most people's thought processes,
Mhm.
to keep up with the technology. And that's why GTD is so critical now, is because it's teaching the thought process about how you need to engage from a thinking process about all that stuff and all those opportunities and all those things, and not let them overwhelm you. you
So,
know
what advice do you have for folks who are now working from their home office and are dealing with, all of those distractions, the kids knocking on the door, everything that's going on around you? Uh,
yeah.
how can you stay productive in that kind of an environment? Whereas back in the old days, when you had an office, you could shut your office door and you could get work done for the most part.
Not only that, you could be on the train for 30 minutes or 45 minutes and actually think,
Right.
right, as you were commuting. You don't have that anymore, right?
Right.
So there's no think time. You
And
actually now have to be accountable to yourself to create think time, because as I said, you're now 24/7.
how do you do that?
Well, you just have to do that. Well, first of all, to the first question, is that, and my advice to people, if they haven't done it already, is you need to create context, a business context at home. You need to have an environment. It doesn't have to be big, but it has to be yours. And ideally, if you have a door you can close, then that's great. But even if not, you need to create a psychological, and ideally as much as you can as a physical context, that when I sit down at this desk and I have my laptop or my computer on, my in basket here and my files here, I'm in work mode and I start to think in work mode. And then if you live with other people, you got to negotiate with them. Hey guys, when I'm here in this context, eh, you know, can't play. Sorry. And then when you take a break, you move out of that context and you move more into a personal context. Now you can play with the dog, play with the kids, spend time with whatever you want to do. But oh my God, I just forgot, I need to send an email. Boom. You leave that context, you walk back into your work context, and they're out of there, and you are in that context. And that I think that's probably one of the most critical things you could do. I have different contexts. If I'm trying to write a foreword to a friend of mine's book, which I just did, um, I'm not doing that where you see me right now. I'm in my workstation. I'm taking my laptop into the living room in my easy chair and sitting back and turning on the laptop and doing more sort of free form thinking and whatever. I move back to here. As soon as I sit down here, what's in my email? What's in my in basket? How to clean that up? Oh yeah, and here's what I need to focus on and whatever. And I move more into a business context when I'm in there. So you're right. In that sense, context is king. So you need to make sure you've structured your own, both psychologically as well as physically.
Although it seems to me that if you move from your workspace office to your living room, um, there's maybe more distractions that are tempting you. I mean, Netflix is calling.
Yeah, it could be. But those are all creative. Again, that's like, well, do I want to stop and just watch, binge on a Netflix thing, you know, or do I want to use this time to do that? And that's just your personal direction,
Hmm.
in terms of, okay, is it time to relax? Is it time to zone out? Is it time to give my brain rest time, relax time where I'm not focusing, I'm not having to think. So again, back to your previous question about how do I structure think time. Uh, you need to be aware that the brain needs to rest. So you also need to structure brain rest time. You need to get enough sleep. You need to take naps in the afternoon if you can afford to do that. You need to, give it time to reintegrate itself, all the stuff that we deal with. God, psychologically, we're all dealing with so many more things than most people realize. Wow, what's the weather like? What that email? Or what that? Oh my God, the kids wanted that, and oh yeah, I told. My prescription to my antihistamines, they're about to run out. That's why that's in my in basket, by the way. So it's like, whoa. So there's so much complexity that people are dealing with all the time. So being able to build structured environments where it's time to sit down and let me think about those kind of things now in this context, and then have your tools all set up. That's why, of course, another big thing is don't share your workspace at home with anybody else. And people with life partners, that there are living partners that they're living with. It's like, don't share, guys. You don't. You could even use the same desk, but that's their half. This is your half.
Hmm.
Not much would bother me, Dave, uh, given just how I am in my life. But one thing would really bother me is if somebody comes in and rearranges my workspace, because then I have to come back and rearrange my workspace so I can get work done. I want to sit down and do work.
Yeah.
I want to sit
Yeah.
down and go. Don't denigrate my context by forcing me to have to restructure my context.
What about those individuals, though, who don't have a designated room where that they can call an office, where now that they're at home doing their work, they're at the kitchen table, the dining room table, or on the couch. Um, it, it- they don't have that kind of solitude or that space for solitude.
Yeah. Well, we just bought an apartment in Amsterdam, and the couple we just bought it from uh, just bought a bigger place because they've got two kids and they needed more room because now they're working from home.
Hmm.
He's a senior executive at Philips, and and their office was the end of their dining room table.
Yeah.
So yeah, and a lot of that depends on you know Dave, and anybody listening or watching this knows. You walk in and somebody is totally focused on what they're doing. You're going to think twice before you interrupt them. You know, so a lot of it has to do with what's your uh, maybe intensity may be the wrong word. What's your concentrated, your look of concentration that you're engaged in? Because that's going to, create more of a psychic context,
Hmm.
and a yellow police tape around you than anything else. And people
I knew
say, "Oh,
somebody.
by the way, could you say, excuse me, could you write me a note and put it in my in basket, or send me
Yeah.
an email about that? Thank you. I'm involved."
Right. I knew
Right.
somebody who would sit at their cubicle with headphones on. They weren't listening to anything, but it was just a telegraph that they were, engaged in something.
Yeah. No, no, I know. I know.
So when
Well,
you're
my licensee, it's my partners in India. They sent me a picture years ago, because when they were doing their weekly review, I always made a joke. I said, look, when you're doing a weekly review, if you just work in a cubicle or whatever, at least get some yellow police tape, and strap it around there, and they actually created yellow police tape. They said weekly review in progress. And they had that strapped around their cubicle, right?
they could
So
sell that. That's a lot of money.
that's a little extreme, but
Sure.
that's
Well,
that idea.
what I'm kind of talking about here, what we've been talking about is the work environment and the different level of distractions. I mean, even when we all worked in a traditional office, I mean, I used to have people who would just come into my office because they wanted to quick tell me something or whatever. And sometimes I was open to that. Sometimes I said that, hey, can you send me an email approach? But now that we're in our office, we do have distractions. And I'm wondering now, in terms of your efficiency at work, do you work in quiet? Do you have music on? Do you have, I mean, how do you work
I,
best?
I I work in quiet. When I'm doing weekly reviews, I have a Spotify playlist called Work Classics,
Hmm.
right? So, you know, hang
But
on,
when
let me
you're
see if
doing
I.
your but when you're doing your daily work though, you're not listening to it.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Now, some people do. Some
Right.
people that has a lot to do with just your own work style, you know, and and what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, if I'm doing contemplative or reflective business work, I put on my Work Classics playlist. It's not disturbing, and I'll put a little more in the background than this is, but just so you can hear it.
Yeah.
But that, Chopin, Vivaldi, Bach, those things that will be there. And that's that. In the old days they talked about. I'll turn it off. They talked about the sort of the Baroque uh, um, rhythm. 60 beats per second or per
Mhm.
minute,
Well,
whatever.
that was the whole theory
That,
behind Muzak.
right, exactly. And so that moves you, and it does move me into different states. So I've had my sort of weekly review, kind of playlist that I've had for years.
Well, I've got
And
my
so,
Springsteen playlist, so it's a different genre.
understood. Yeah. Well, you're a
What
little younger than me, so.
what about uh, I've been thinking about my office here at home, and I have a window over there, and I was thinking at first of repositioning my desk so I would be able to have that window right in front of me, but I'm worried about whether or not that's a distraction.
No, I think you need different horizons. Your brain needs to rest every so often, and you can rest with different horizons visually. That's why it's nicer to go into a restaurant where you have different horizons to see people or whatever, but still have your own space, as opposed to just you and me in a little private room in a restaurant.
Mhm.
Only if I'm asking you to marry me, would that make sense? you know
I'm spoken for, David. I'm sorry.
but otherwise, actually, your brain likes to have different horizons, multiple horizons. It's more relaxed when it actually does that. That's why it's great to have a window,
Yeah.
because every once in a while you finish that email, you need to turn around, kind of look out and see what's going on, see the bird, see what the clouds are, see if it's raining or not.
Hmm.
That's absolutely healthy, and frankly necessary if you can do it.
One of the things that GTD helped me with was to get an understanding of, well, the whole concept of waiting for, assisting me in delegation, and that was a big help. But now with the environment we're in, where everybody's basically interacting via Zoom calls, um, it's different because in the old days I would see people in the hallway and I would say, "Hey, Jack, what about this?" Or have more frequent status meetings that were informal. What about the whole delegation process in this COVID world? How can we keep that on track?
Changed for me. I just done that from the very beginning. Why would you want to bother anybody about asking that when you should keep it on a list? And then when you talk to them on some consistent basis, you can bring it up,
Hmm.
right? And so, you know, most people use interruption as a way to not manage a system. So why don't you keep track of that? And it's okay to walk in. I can walk in with Catherine and say, hey, by the way, uh, we just have got to change our healthcare thing. Here's my form. I just had to fill out. I just throw it in your in basket. She goes, okay, got it. So that was fine. I didn't need to send that an email. Like Catherine and I email each other regularly, and she's sitting in just the other room right over there because I'm not going to go interrupt her. She's doing stuff. Why should I do that? But we've done that for years. We've been married for 30 years and we've never, she met me in a GTD seminar. So she's been doing this stuff for 35 years. So we just work that way. That's like, duh. But I understand if that's not a standard practice for people, then they need to make sure that that's just integral. So that didn't change the methodology. Absolutely, you need to keep track of all that.
Hmm.
I was just on a call just before you and I got on, and I had several notes I made as we were talking in our Zoom call about stuff that I needed to do and what I'm waiting on for them. And I just made those little notes right there. Those things went in my in basket. We had a few minutes before you and I talked. So I just processed those things, and that piece of paper is now down in my trash. But that was how I did it. But that hasn't changed in 30 years.
Hmm.
But for most people, if they don't have the GTD practice, trying to manage that before you have a GTD practice under your belt is like insane.
Hmm.
There is no answer to that. That's why GTD was the answer to that.
Hmm. Are you still mostly analog, or are your systems gravitating digitally?
Oh, they've been digital for many, many years. My capture is all analog,
Hmm.
almost all. Every once in a while, I might record something on my iPhone using a little app there that then sends it automatically to my email if I record anything. But I barely use that at all. I barely even carry my phone with me, when I go out unless I need it for GPS, you know, uh, because yeah, I mean, I've been, but capture is very different than organize. So I
Hmm.
capture because, look, this requires no batteries, no Wi-Fi. It's instantly accessible. Same is true with this thing sitting in my pocket. I'm sure you've seen many times, the note taker wallet. So this stuff gets grabbed there, but that's low tech and that's not digital.
Hmm.
Digital requires too much effort.
But your
Uh,
lists and all of those things are now all digital.
those are all digital. Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Because, it's easy to connect things or whatever. Everything has a downside to it. And again, I know, some high tech people that have gone back to paper because they're kind of ADD or ADHD-esque kind of folks. And frankly, every click, you're going to lose attention. So if you have to click 3 times to turn on your phone and then get to a place to then record into it and to track something that you need to remind yourself about, forget it.
hmm
It has way too much work.
hmm
So even those folks, some of them have gone back to even paper-based systems simply because it's more in your face, doesn't require clicks, doesn't require anything. It's available to you there, and of course it has the downside. It doesn't connect digitally to anything else.
hmm
That you might want to connect a note to or any of the stuff that you want to track. So there's no perfect solution out there, I'm afraid, not yet. Once we have uh, membraned paper that is digitally connected so that you could have what looks like a paper-based planner, but all the pages are digitally connected, so that you write something on your, whatever, it instantly goes into the cloud, instantly goes to your other systems or whatever. So you could be functionally like a low-tech, person in terms of capturing and even organizing or being reminded about stuff, and then you open your paper-based calendar and you see that your assistant or your secretary has inserted a calendar for 5 o'clock this afternoon. Huh, how cool is that? Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that technology actually is available. It's just too expensive for anybody to produce, and the market doesn't care that it thinks it needs it.
Right. People are
So
starting to
it's
play with it though. So things will happen with it. I want to take
not
you back.
in my lifetime. Look, I'm 75. I don't think it's going to happen even in my lifetime, because the market's not there. People just keeping still crap in their head.
Right.
Why do they think they need tools that they're going to that would allow their head to empty?
Well, I think back to a device like, do you remember the Newton? Uh,
Yeah,
that was like, that was way ahead of its time.
but it was so clunky. It was so weird. Yeah. You remember the Palm Pilot?
Listen, I still have mine. I mean, it doesn't work, but I'm never getting rid of it. In many respects,
There was no better capture organized tool on the planet. Still
right.
not.
And
Yeah.
I still sometimes find myself doing the graffiti writing when am taking quick notes, by the way.
I don't know if I'd probably, if it would come back to
Oh,
me if
it'll
you
come back to you.
gave me a poem. Yeah, but I loved it, and it looked great in a dark bar at night when you opened it up. It was very sexy. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to go back to one other thing that you mentioned earlier, because I didn't pick up on it then, but I think it's really important. You were talking about how the brain needs to rest and how we need to sort of set aside time for when we're in work mode and when we're in our personal life mode. What is the best way of doing that? Is that just blocking time out on the calendar, or what's the best way of doing that?
I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, Dave. I just do what I feel like doing, and then pay attention whether I'm getting negative feedback about that or whether I should improve that or change it. Rules are made when brains run out. So uh, I, 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 I structure as little as I can in my life. I just do what I feel like doing. I
Hmm.
sleep as long as I can. The night before, I look at my schedule to see what time I need to wake up in the morning so I can sleep as long as I can. And then in the morning, I sort of do an emergency scan of email to see if any barns burning or any fun stuff I want to see or any spam I can delete instantly. And then I just kind of go, okay, now what?
But is
And I
that
just let
because is that because you're the founder and the senior executive of a big deal company? I mean, what if you're a middle level manager and you've got certainly more inputs and more demands on your time than you might have?
well, you need to decide what those are, whether this is what you want to be doing. Duh.
But
Sorry.
you're controlling your agenda where a lot of people can't.
Of course not. And I can't control the weather. I can't control what my wife is doing. I can't control when my dog wants to go pee. I can't control a lot of stuff in my life. But I understand what you're saying. A lot of people have committed themselves into a life that has structure and requirements of their time and space about how they use it. So you better just understand what those are
Hmm.
and then accept it, ignore it or play with it. I mean, you can look, it is what it is, right? It's paying your rent. All right. So therefore, what do you need to do to make sure you fulfill your agreement so you don't have that as an issue and you're on cruise? What do you need to do to be on cruise control? Come on, if you're an emergency responder, come on, you're on cruise control just to be able to have an alarm and a phone by you when you sleep,
Hmm.
right? In order to be able to have nothing on your mind, you need to trust your system is set up to manage the exigencies. Is that a good word? I think it is.
Hmm.
Of all the things that may show up relative to your agreements.
Hmm.
And that could be a strange call for you. Come on. I was coaching the senior staff of a CEO of a major, Wall Street firm, CEO of a major Wall Street firm. And she had to be available on her phone because her boss would be in Hong Kong. She was in London and he needed a phone number and he hated to carry things around with him. So he would call her at 3 o'clock in the morning for a phone number. Right. So she either had to say, okay, how do I manage that? And how do I deal with that? And that's part of the nature of my job. She was paid a lot. So hopefully she was paid enough to make it worth her while, but that was just the nature of what that game was. So you just need to you you got to get clear. What's the nature of the game and my agreements about it?
Hmm.
And given that, what are the parameters I need to set up? So I'm willing to do that. What I'm not willing to do is this. right?
Yeah.
So she couldn't not answer her phone. Well, she was an emergency responder, just at a different level.
Mhm. I was reading an article recently, though, about how the coronavirus is really going to change the way people look at work, in the sense that the 9 to 5 world is gone. Because a lot of people are saying they're far more productive at 7 at night than they are at 9 in the morning, and that's going to, I think, require us to even rethink some of our systems. How do we stay in touch? What is a status meeting? What, how do you do these things in this time when work is not defined really by the clock anymore?
Sure. Well, that's been true since since the teleconference was available. But I don't know if you can remember, this is probably 20 years ago when you could actually have a teleconference in a conference room.
Hmm.
And most people didn't do that. Do you know how many people resisted three-way dialing? Because nobody trusted the system. But three-way dialing was so cool. Wow. Hey, wait a minute. Stop. We're having this. Let's get Paul on the phone. Click. Get ring Paul. Paul gets on. Wow, we're three-way talking. Do you know how long that's been available and how few people ever took advantage of that?
Hmm.
So it's not so much about the availability of being able to create, the conferences, the conversations, the interactions, the communications, ad hoc. That's been around forever. So there's nothing new about the challenges and the opportunities that brings. So now, yeah, you can talk the world, and
Right.
that's also one of the sources of stress is because it's kind of 24/7. If you're in a global company now, God knows when you might need to be on a Zoom call.
Sure. Sure.
You know, and
So
so, but that's again part of your job. But so yes, that's been changing dramatically given the technology and the ease of the technology of making those communications possible and necessary,
mhm.
simply because you couldn't get on a plane, to go to those places. But how
So
much cheaper is that?
what I'm hearing you say as we discuss, life in the COVID environment is that if you have a good system in place, um, these changes that we're seeing now really shouldn't affect the way you're staying productive.
Well, they will affect it, but you just need to integrate it and manage it,
Hmm.
just like you do with any. If you're a good GTD practitioner, that's what. Oh my God, I have to work from home. Project, uh, get home office on cruise control. Great. Next action. Ah, have a family conference about my context about me working from home. Uh, um, Errand, IKEA, get a home office desk. If I don't have it, errand. So that's why I said when we even started this conversation, GTD becomes that much more critical when you're surprised. When you have to change your situation. You know, if things are on cruise control, well, yeah, they're on cruise control. That's fine. But
Hmm.
when they're not, how fast can you get it back onto cruise control? What do you need to do? And that's where the GTD process comes in. What are the actions I need to take? The projects that represents that I need to keep track of until they're complete, etc. And
Hmm.
that could be as subtle as I need to make sure that I'm clear with my family about how we're now all working together given this strange new context, right? And so that's a project. And then you need to ask yourself and answer, what's my next action?
Hmm.
So as opposed to being victim and reactor to the change, you need to be in the driver's seat about it. So GTD doesn't make life simple. It just puts you in the driver's seat about navigating it.
Very good. So before we wrap up, I just want to shift a little bit to maybe more of a personal note. We're recording this in the middle of January, and I haven't gotten my COVID vaccine yet. What's life in Amsterdam? Are you on lockdown? Are you getting your vaccine? What's
Yeah,
going on?
yeah. No, they're on serious lockdown now. They just had a demonstration yesterday, which was so strange of all the people that wanted to go back to the bars again. And so, how weird is this? The police had to pull out a water cannon to stop these, hundreds and hundreds of people on the museum line that were, oh my God, open the bars, open the bars. Oh my God, grow up. So, so yeah, it's tightly locked down. That's why my hair is getting longer because I can't go get a barber. right now. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's tightly locked down now. It appears to have plateaued off here in terms of just the numbers, but not a lot. So it's still there. So that's there. And our lifestyle, they haven't closed down the food shops. They haven't closed down, uh, the parks that we can walk our dog in, and as long as we can get food and wine and walk our dog, that nothing changed for us. But that's just our personal lifestyle. We don't have a lot more that we're invested in, and all of my work is virtual anyway.
yeah, yeah. Well, we all wish you the best of health, and thank you again for joining me for this conversation.
Dave, this was fun as usual. So maybe we could create a series of Dave and David.
There we go.